She didn't knock. She didn't call ahead. She simply turned off the engine, stepped out into the kind of cold that makes you question every decision you've ever made, and stood in the snow staring at a cabin she had never once visited, the only thing left in her name. And that's when she saw them. Footprints. Not hers. Fresh. Deliberate. Leading from the side of the cabin toward the back door, pressed cleanly into the snow like someone had walked there recently. Maybe hours ago. Maybe less. Meredith Crane was 61 years old, had no job, no apartment, and approximately 4 months of savings if she was careful. She was standing alone on a Montana mountainside in February with a blizzard building at her back, and someone was already living in her house. She stood there for a long moment. Then she picked up her flashlight, straightened her spine, and walked toward the door. Because Meredith Crane had not survived 31 years in a profession that chewed up quiet, capable women and spat them out just to be frightened by footprints. Not yet, anyway. Let's go back to where this really began. Portland, Oregon. February. A Tuesday so gray and heavy it felt like the sky had given up entirely. Meredith had been awake since 5:15, the same as every weekday for the better part of 3 decades. Coffee black. NPR at low volume. A 20-minute drive to the Hartwell Greer Insurance Group offices downtown, where she had worked since she was 29 years old. 31 years. Think about that for a moment. 31 years is longer than most marriages last. Longer than it takes a child to be born, grow up, finish college, and build a career of their own. Meredith had given that span of her life, the best of it, the sharpest of it, to a company whose name she had watched change 3 times through 3 different acquisitions. She knew which conference room had the broken projector. She knew which accounting manager cried in the bathroom during tax season and needed someone to quietly slide a granola bar under the stall door. She knew the alarm code, the IT override password, the name of the overnight cleaning supervisor's daughter who had just started at Portland State. She knew everything about that building. And on a frozen Tuesday morning in February, she arrived to find a subject line in her inbox that began with the words, "Organizational transition, important update." The email was 4 paragraphs long. It used the words restructuring, streamlining, and valued contribution 3 times each. It did not use the word fired. But by 10 o'clock, her key card no longer worked. Here is what no one tells you about being let go after 3 decades. It isn't the shock that breaks you. You almost expect the shock. You've seen it happen to others. You've heard the stories. You've told yourself you were prepared. What breaks you is the smallness of it. The way a career that consumed your 40s and your 50s and the early edge of your 60s gets reduced to a cardboard box and a handshake from someone in HR you've never met. The way the younger colleagues you trained and mentored and covered for during their hard seasons suddenly stop making eye contact in the parking lot. The way your email signature disappears from the server before you've even made it home. Meredith sat in her car for 45 minutes before she could drive. She didn't cry. She was too numb for crying. She just sat there with the heater running and the city moving past her windshield and tried to locate herself, tried to find the edges of who she was without the title, without the building, without the 31 years of accumulated identity. She couldn't find them. The next several days moved in a blur she would later struggle to account for. Her apartment lease, she discovered, was up for renewal at the end of the month, a fact she had meant to address but had pushed aside during a busy January. The renewal rate had increased by nearly 40%, a number that had seemed manageable on a salary and now felt like a wall. She had no family in Portland. Her marriage had ended quietly 8 years earlier. No bitterness, just 2 people who had grown into separate shapes and finally admitted it. Her daughter, Petra, lived in Edinburgh with her husband, and a toddler Meredith had met twice in person. They spoke on Sundays. She called Petra the evening after the termination. "Mom, you could come here," Petra said immediately. Meredith loved her daughter for saying it. She also knew she wouldn't do it. She was 61, not 16. She was not going to cross an ocean to sit in her daughter's spare room and rearrange her grief where someone else could see it. "I'll be fine," she said. "I have a plan." She did not yet have a plan. The plan arrived 4 days later in the form of a letter from a Montana estate attorney named Clifford Baines, who had been attempting to reach Meredith for the better part of 2 years regarding property left in the estate of one Emery Crane, her father's older brother, a man Meredith had met perhaps 6 times in her life and remembered mostly as tall, quiet, and fond of flannel. Emery had died 18 months earlier at the age of 87. He had left her a cabin. Small, the attorney wrote. Structurally sound as of last inspection, though some deferred maintenance. Propane heat, wood fireplace, well water. Situated on 11 acres in the Bitterroot Range, approximately 30 miles from the nearest town. Meredith read the letter twice. Then she pulled up the property on a satellite map and stared at a dark smudge of rooftops surrounded by forest and mountain and white. She thought, I have nowhere else to go. Then she thought, it has a roof. Then she called Clifford Baines, arranged the title transfer, packed her sedan with the contents of her life she cared most about, which turned out to be 2 suitcases, a box of books, her grandmother's quilt, and her good kitchen knife, and drove north. She told herself it was temporary. She told herself she would stay through February, get her bearings, and figure out the next practical step from a place of stillness rather than panic. She told herself a lot of things on that drive. The mountain didn't care about any of them. She arrived after dark on a Thursday evening, the last 90 minutes of the drive consumed by a narrow two-lane road that climbed steadily into a silence so complete it felt physical. The heater in her sedan worked hard. The radio had stopped picking up anything meaningful around mile 40. By the time she turned onto the dirt access road leading up to the cabin, snow was falling in earnest, thick, purposeful flakes that swallowed her headlights at the edges. The cabin appeared in her high beams like something from a photograph she had never taken. Smaller than she'd imagined. Stout, crouched beneath a stand of enormous pines, its roof thick with white, its windows dark. A covered porch ran across the front. A woodpile, she noticed, substantial, neatly stacked, stood along the left exterior wall. She sat in the idling car and looked at it. This is mine, she thought. This strange, dark, silent thing is mine. She turned off the engine. And that was when her flashlight found them. The footprints. She followed them slowly, her breath fogging in clouds, her flashlight beam cutting a pale lane through the dark. The prints led from the far corner of the cabin around toward the back door, measured steps, not rushed, not frantic. Whoever had made them had not been running from anything. They had simply been walking, living. The front door lock resisted her key at first, stiff with disuse. Then it gave. The air that reached her was warm. Not heated furnace warm, but warm the way a room is warm when something has been burning in it for hours. She stepped inside. Her flashlight swept the room. Stone fireplace on the far wall. Inside it, embers, faint orange and red, still alive. A wool blanket draped over the back of an armchair. A pair of worn work boots near the door, set neatly to one side. A tin mug on the kitchen table. A folded newspaper, 2 weeks old. Someone was living here. Had been living here. Meredith stood very still. Then, from somewhere down the dark hallway to her right, came the unmistakable sound of a floorboard shifting beneath weight. She did not run. She squared her shoulders, aimed her flashlight at the hallway, and said in a voice that came out steadier than she felt, "Hello. I know you're there." A pause. Then footsteps. Slow, measured. And a figure emerged from the shadow at the end of the hall. A man. Older, mid-70s, she would have guessed. Tall but carrying his height like something he'd grown tired of. A gray beard, trimmed enough to suggest self-respect. A heavy flannel shirt, faded at the elbows. Hands that, even in the dim light, looked like they had built things and lifted things and weathered things for a very long time. He stopped when he saw her. They stared at each other across the small living room. 2 strangers. 1 house. A blizzard pressing in from all sides. Finally he said, "I can explain." His voice was low, rough at the edges, but not unkind. Meredith lowered the flashlight slightly. "Not all the way, not yet. This is my house," she said. The words felt strange in her mouth. She hadn't said that sentence in years. Maybe ever. The man studied her face. The exhaustion behind her eyes. The snow still melting on her coat. The suitcase handle she hadn't let go of since she walked in. "I thought it was abandoned," he said quietly. "Been here 3 winters. Nobody ever came." 3 winters. Meredith felt something shift in her chest. Not quite anger, not quite grief. Something older and heavier than both. "What's your name?" she asked. "Soren," he said. Soren Hadley. Outside, the wind picked up against the cabin walls. Inside, the embers still glowed. Meredith Crane set her suitcase down. She didn't know it yet, couldn't possibly have known it, but that small act, That single decision to set the suitcase down instead of turning around was the first brick of everything that came after. Before we continue this incredible journey, I spent significant time researching and crafting this story because I believe it carries something real. If stories like this one speak to you, if they remind you that human beings are still capable of surprising each other in the best possible ways, please subscribe and hit the notification bell. It helps this story reach someone who might need it today. Now, let's see what happens when the storm gets worse. Before we move on, tell me in the comments, have you ever found yourself in a situation where everything fell apart at once, and something completely unexpected became your turning point? I read every single comment. Neither of them moved for a long moment. The cabin held its breath around them. Snow ticked softly against the window panes. The embers in the fireplace breathed their faint orange light across the floorboards. Outside, the wind was beginning to find its voice, low at first, then rising, the way a difficult conversation rises before it breaks open. Meredith looked at the man called Soren Hadley. She had spent 31 years reading people across conference tables, reading the ones who were confident and the ones who were performing confidence, reading the ones who were honest and the ones who had learned to wear honesty like a costume. It was perhaps the only skill her career had given her that she could carry out the door in a cardboard box. She read Soren Hadley now. What she saw was not a threat. What she saw was a man who was tired in the specific way that comes not from one hard night, but from a long succession of them. A man who was standing very still because he had learned that stillness was safer than motion. A man who, she noticed, had stepped slightly to the side when he emerged from the hallway, positioning himself away from the door, not toward it, giving her the exit, giving her the choice. That detail stayed with her. "You said 3 winters," she said finally. "Yes. That's a long time to stay somewhere that isn't yours." He nodded once, accepting the weight of that without deflecting it. "It is," he said. "I won't pretend otherwise." Meredith looked around the room again, more slowly this time. Her flashlight had found the wall switch by the door, but when she tried it, nothing happened. She tried it twice. "Electricity's been out since November," Soren said. "I've been running a battery lantern. It's on the kitchen shelf." She found it, clicked it on. Warm yellow light filled the room. The cabin came into focus, and what she saw surprised her. She had expected neglect. She had prepared herself, on the drive up, for the particular brand of damage that comes from an uninhabited structure in a mountain climate. Warped floorboards, animal intrusion, mold climbing the corners, the smell of damp wood, and abandonment. What she found instead was a space that had been cared for. Not decorated, not comfortable in any design sense, but tended. The floorboards were swept clean. The windows, she walked to one and touched the frame, had been recaulked, recently by the look of it, the new sealant still slightly pale against the older paint. The woodpile by the hearth was stacked with geometric precision, each log placed to allow airflow. On the kitchen counter, a row of basic supplies, canned goods, dried beans, a small bag of oats, were arranged with the quiet orderliness of someone who respected the space they occupied. The broken hinge on the back door, she would discover later, had been repaired. The roof gutter on the east side, which had been pulling away from the fascia for years according to the attorney's inspection notes, had been secured with new brackets. Soren Hadley had not simply lived in this cabin. He had looked after it. She turned back to him. "You did all this?" she asked. A gesture that took in the room. He shrugged, and in the shrug was something she recognized, the particular discomfort of a capable person who is used to having their capability acknowledged. "Kept myself occupied," he said. "And it needed doing." "You were a builder?" She had noticed the hands again. The way he stood, the ease with which he'd assessed the room when he walked in. The brackets on the gutter. There was professional knowledge in all of it. Something moved briefly across his face. "Structural engineer," he said. "For about 22 years." The past tense landed in the room like a stone dropped into still water. Meredith understood past tense. She was living inside it herself. "Meredith Crane," she said. She crossed the room and extended her hand. He looked at it for just a moment, not suspiciously, but with the slight surprise of someone who hadn't been offered a handshake in a while. Then he took it. His grip was firm and brief and honest. "Soren Hadley," he said again, as if reintroducing himself now that they were on different terms. "I know," she said. "You mentioned." The ghost of a smile crossed his face. It changed him slightly, made him look, for just a moment, less like a man braced for consequence. She did not ask him to leave that night. She told herself it was purely practical. The storm had thickened into something serious in the hour since she'd arrived, and sending a man in his mid-70s out into a Montana blizzard at 9 o'clock at night was not a decision she was willing to make regardless of the circumstances. She told herself it was temporary, a one-night arrangement born of weather and necessity. She told herself a lot of things. What was also true was this. The cabin was small and the fire was low and the mountain outside was very dark and very large, and Meredith Crane, for all her composure, had not spoken to another human being in person for 4 days. "There's a second room?" she asked, nodding toward the hallway. "Small one. I've been using it. There's a cot." He paused. "I can sleep out here." "Don't be absurd," she said. "You take the room. I'll take the chair." He looked like he might argue. "Soren." Her voice was quiet but final. "I've slept in worse places than an armchair. I once spent a night on a conference room floor during a system migration. I survived that. I'll survive this." He studied her for a moment. Then he went to the chest near the fireplace, opened it, and pulled out a second wool blanket, heavier than the one on the chair, its edges worn smooth with age. He held it out to her without comment. She took it. That was the first act of kindness between them. Small, practical. A blanket handed across a cold room by a man who had very little and chose to share it anyway. Meredith would think about that gesture later, many times, in the months that followed. How it contained, in its simplicity, everything that mattered about a person. They didn't talk much that first evening. Not because there was nothing to say, but because there was too much, and both of them were too old and too bruised to pretend that small talk was a bridge wide enough to carry the weight of what had brought each of them here. But they talked a little. She learned that Soren had grown up in Minnesota, that he had built bridges, literal bridges, for most of his working life, contracting across the Pacific Northwest. That 3 years ago a series of medical bills following a cardiac event had dismantled everything he had saved methodically over 2 decades. That the apartment had gone first, then the truck, then the carefully maintained fiction that he was managing. "I wasn't managing," he said simply, staring into the fire. "A man I'd done work for years ago had mentioned this cabin once. Said it had been empty for years. I drove up one October to see if the door would open." He paused. "It did." Meredith was quiet for a moment. "You could have broken things," she said. "Taken things. Most people in that situation would have." "I'm not most people," he said. Not with pride. Just as information. She believed him. "I'm not most people either," she said. "Apparently. Most people, when they lose a 31-year career, have somewhere to go." He looked at her then. Really looked at her. In the way that people rarely do past a certain age, when most conversations are conducted at a slight angle to direct eye contact. "What happened?" he asked. And Meredith, who had not told the story out loud to anyone, not even to Petra in full, found herself telling it. Not dramatically, not with self-pity, just factually, the way she had always processed things, laying the pieces out in order and examining them. The email, the key card, the box, the lease, the attorney's letter. Soren listened without interrupting, without offering consolation before she had finished, without the reflexive "I'm so sorry" that people deployed like a shield to avoid sitting with someone else's pain. When she finished, the fire had burned lower. 31 years, he said quietly. Yes. They didn't deserve you for one of them. It was a plain sentence. He didn't reach for poetry. He just said the true thing, the way a man who had spent his life assessing structural integrity said true things, plainly, and with complete confidence. Meredith looked at the fire for a long time. "No," she said finally. "I don't think they did." Something loosened in her chest when she said it. Something that had been wound tight since that Tuesday morning in Portland. Since before that. Maybe. Since the first time she'd laughed at a joke that wasn't funny because the person telling it outranked her. Since the first time she'd made herself smaller to make someone else more comfortable. Something let go. She pulled Soren's blanket tighter around her shoulders. "Get some sleep," she said. "I want to see this property in daylight." He stood and paused at the hallway entrance. "There's oats on the counter," he said. "And a pot. Fire'll still be going in the morning if you bank it right before you sleep. I'll show you how if you want." She nodded. He showed her. Stack the larger logs at the back. Reduce the airflow from the damper. Not closed, just narrowed. Let it breathe slowly through the night rather than burning hot and dying fast. Fires are like a lot of things, he said, adjusting the damper with the ease of long habit. Starve it, and it dies. Let it run wild, and it burns out. Find the middle, and it'll still be there when you wake up. Meredith watched his hands. Did you learn that from engineering? She asked. No, he said. I learned it from getting it wrong enough times. He went to his room. She settled into the armchair with the heavy blanket and the low fire and the sound of the storm working itself into a fury against the walls. She did not sleep immediately. She lay in that particular wakefulness that comes when a life has just turned a corner it didn't announce in advance, and thought about fires that burned slow and steady through the night, and what it meant to find one still going when the darkness finally ended. Outside, the mountain held them both, and the blizzard, building toward the crisis that would change everything between them before morning, gathered itself in the dark. This story is just beginning to unfold, and the next part is where everything shifts. But first, I want to hear from you. If you had arrived at that cabin and found a stranger living inside, what would you have done? Would you have asked them to leave in that storm? Or would you have made the same choice Meredith did? Tell me honestly in the comments. Every response gets read. The crack came at 12:47 in the morning. Meredith knew the exact time because she had been awake, watching the battery lantern cast slow shadows across the ceiling, listening to the storm escalate from something serious into something that felt almost personal, as though the mountain had decided to test the quality of what had arrived on its slopes that evening. The first sound was sharp and high, like a gunshot filtered through wood. She was out of the armchair before the echo finished. The second sound came 3 seconds later, deeper, structural, a long grinding complaint from somewhere at the back of the cabin, followed by a percussion of falling debris that vibrated through the floorboards beneath her feet. Soren was already in the hallway when she reached it. He had his boots on. He was carrying the lantern. Their eyes met in the yellow light. Back storage room, he said. Not a question. He had heard it and already knew. They moved together down the narrow hall. The door to the back room had swollen in the cold and required a shoulder to open. Soren put his into it without hesitation. It gave. What greeted them was winter. A section of the rear roofline, roughly 4 feet wide, running along the junction where the storage room met the main structure, had surrendered to the accumulated weight above it. A support beam, old and long under stress, had snapped at its midpoint. Snow poured through the gap in a slow, determined cascade, already building a pale mound on the storage room floor. Cold air poured in with it, immediate and savage, dropping the temperature in the hallway by 10 degrees in the first 30 seconds. Meredith stood in the doorway and felt something cold move through her that had nothing to do with the wind. This was the only thing she had. The only solid ground in a life that had just liquefied beneath her. And it was opening up to the sky. The old panic began its familiar crawl up her spine. The same contraction she had felt in that conference room. The same helpless vertigo of watching something she depended on simply cease to hold. Then Soren's voice, calm and specific, cut through it. We can brace it, he said. Temporary support under the break point, tarp over the gap. It won't be pretty, but it'll hold the night. He was already scanning the room, his engineer's eye moving with a speed and confidence that had nothing to do with age. I need to know what's in this cabin. Lumber, pipe, anything straight and load-bearing. The calm in his voice did something to her. Not because it was reassuring in a soft way. Because it was technical. Because it treated the crisis as a problem with a solution rather than a catastrophe without one. Because it assumed, without asking, that she was going to help. Meredith Crane straightened her spine. There's a storage shelf in the main room, she said. I saw reclaimed boards stacked under it when I came in. 4 of them, maybe 5. Heavy gauge. Length, 8 feet. Maybe 9. That'll do. He was already moving. There's rope in the chest by the fireplace, left side, under the canvas. And I need you to find the tarp. Should be folded on the top shelf in here if the water hasn't reached it yet. She was already looking. What followed was 1 hour and 14 minutes of the most demanding physical work Meredith had done in decades. She held the ladder, a short, battered aluminum thing Soren had found leaning behind the woodpile, while he worked above her in the gap, his breath coming in visible clouds, his hands moving with deliberate speed in the beam of the lantern she'd wedged into a shelf at the right angle. Snow came down on both of them. Her gloves soaked through inside 20 minutes. Her arms, holding that ladder steady against the torque of Soren's weight and effort, began to burn at the 15-minute mark and screamed at the 30. She did not let go. He positioned the first support beam, angled from floor to the broken rafter, wedged tight, with a block of firewood at the base. Then the second, parallel to the first, creating a cradle of force beneath the compromised section. His instructions to her were clear and sequential, delivered without condescension, the way a person instructs someone they trust to be competent. Hold the base, don't let it kick left. Pass me the rope end, the long tail, not the loop. When I say brace, lean your weight into the ladder base. Don't think about it, just do it. When he said brace, she braced. When he said hold, she held. At the 40-minute mark, he lost his footing on the top rung. It happened fast, a shift of weight, a patch of ice on the aluminum, a half-second of nothing beneath him. Meredith felt the ladder torque violently in her hands. Her shoulder hit the wall. She locked her knees and her grip in her jaw and held on with everything she had. Soren caught. Meredith took the first 2 hours in the armchair, while Soren kept watch on the repair. Then he slept on the floor near the fire. Refusing the armchair with a quiet stubbornness she didn't have the energy to argue with, and she sat up through the last dark hours of the storm, feeding logs into the fireplace and watching the tarp hold against the wind. She thought about a lot of things in those hours. She thought about the 31 years and what they had cost her in ways the severance package would never address. She thought about the woman she had been at 29, walking into that office building for the first time, ambitious and precise and certain that loyalty and competence were a sufficient foundation for a life. She thought about Soren Hadley, about what it meant to have been a man who built bridges, literal, structural bridges that bore the weight of thousands of people daily, and to have ended up here, sheltering in someone else's cabin, repairing its gutters and its hinges not because he had been asked to, but because something in him was simply unable to leave broken things alone. She thought about the beam they had braced together, how neither of them could have done it alone, how that was obvious and simple, and yet somehow, in the particular darkness of 4 in the morning on a Montana mountainside, felt like the most important thing she had learned in years. Dawn arrived without drama. The storm had blown itself out somewhere around 5. By 6:15, pale light was pressing through the frosted windows and the wind had dropped to a whisper. Meredith went to the front door and opened it. The world had been remade overnight. Snow covered everything in a depth and completeness that erased the ordinary. The road she had driven up was gone. Not impassable, simply invisible, as though the mountain had decided to keep the question of departure open for a while longer. The trees stood cathedral quiet under their white weight. The air was so clean it almost hurt to breathe. She stood on the porch for a long time. Behind her, she heard Soren wake. Heard him check the back room. The soft footsteps, the pause, the quiet sound of a man confirming that what he had built through the night had held. It had. She heard him come to stand in the doorway behind her. "Still want me gone?" he asked. His voice was careful. He meant it as a real question. Meredith looked out at the white mountain. At the work ahead, the permanent roof repair, the electricity, the 11 acres she had never walked, the strange unformed future that lay under all that snow like something waiting for the right season. She thought about bridges, about the fact that the man standing behind her had spent his career calculating exactly how much weight a structure needed to bear and what it required to bear it without failing. She thought about what it meant to find that particular man in this particular cabin at this particular moment in her life. "No," she said. She turned and looked at him directly. "I think we should figure out what this property actually is," she said. "All of it. Together." Soren held her gaze. Then he gave a single nod. Brief and solid. The way a man confirms a structural assessment he has run the numbers on and found sound. "Coffee first," he said. "We don't have coffee." "Hot water and intention, then." Meredith almost smiled. "Hot water and intention," she agreed. They went inside. The fire was still burning. But what neither of them knew yet, what the mountain was keeping quiet beneath all that snow, was that the most significant discovery was still weeks away. And when it came, it would not arrive with drama or announcement. It would arrive as a sound. Water moving. Steady, warm, and entirely unexpected. The kind of thing that changes not just a life, but the lives of everyone who finds their way to it. The story is building towards something neither of them could have planned. And in few minutes, everything transforms. The property, the partnership, and the two people at the center of it all. But first, this part of the story raises a question I genuinely want your answer to. Have you ever been in a moment where you had to hold on, literally or figuratively, when everything around you was breaking? What got you through it? Share your story below. These comments become a community, and someone reading them right now might need exactly what you have to say. The sound came on a Wednesday morning, 3 weeks after the storm. Meredith had developed a routine by then, not the rigid, alarm clock routine of her Portland life, but something quieter and more organic. She woke when the light changed. She made hot water on the fire. She walked the property for an hour before the cold peaked, notebook in hand, mapping what she owned and what it needed. Soren had stayed, not because she had formally invited him to, not because they had sat down and negotiated terms, but because there was a roof that needed permanent repair, and he knew how to repair it, and she knew how to source materials from the nearest town 30 miles down the mountain, and some arrangements don't require documentation. They simply require two people to keep showing up. He slept in the back room. She had claimed the armchair so thoroughly that it had, by unspoken agreement, become hers. They shared meals, simple, practical, made from what the town's single general store could supply on her twice-weekly drives down the mountain. They worked in the mornings and talked in the evenings, and had developed the particular comfortable silence of people who have survived something together and no longer need to fill the air between them with noise. It was, Meredith thought on more than one occasion, the least lonely she had felt in years, possibly a decade. She heard the water on a Wednesday. She had walked further than usual that morning, following the property line east along a ridge she hadn't yet fully explored, pushing through a stand of young pine where the snow lay thinner under the canopy. She was making notes about the tree line, about the gradient of the land, about the fact that the eastern acreage was more sheltered than she had expected. And then she stopped, because beneath the silence of the mountain, beneath the creak of branches and the soft compression of snow under her boots, there was another sound entirely. Water. Moving water. She stood still and listened to make sure she wasn't manufacturing it. The mind, she had learned, will sometimes produce what the heart wants badly enough. But no, it was real, consistent. A low, steady murmur from somewhere below the ridgeline to her right, where the land dropped away through a dense cluster of rock outcroppings. She found it 10 minutes later. A narrow stream cutting through a shelf of exposed granite, moving with quiet authority despite the surrounding freeze. Clear as anything she had ever seen. But what stopped her, what made her pull off her glove and lower her hand into the current, was the temperature. Warm. Not cold water warm. Not the barely above freezing warmth of snowmelt. This was genuinely, unmistakably warm. The kind of warmth that rose as steam from its surface where the winter air touched it. The kind that meant the source was deep and geothermal and had been moving through the earth for a very long time before it surfaced here, on her land, on this unremarkable Wednesday morning. Meredith knelt beside it for a long time. She didn't let herself think the thought fully. Not yet. She had learned, over 6 decades, that hope was a thing you approached carefully, not because it was dangerous, but because it was fragile, and she had broken enough of it already through the particular carelessness of wanting things too quickly. She just knelt there with her bare hand in warm water on a frozen mountainside, and felt the heat travel up through her wrist and into her arm. Then she got up, put her glove back on, and walked back to the cabin to find Soren. He came with her immediately. He knelt where she had knelt, put his hand where she had put hers, held it there. His expression shifted through several stages: recognition, assessment, then a very careful, very controlled form of interest that she was learning was his version of excitement. "How deep do you think it goes?" she asked. "Can't know without testing." He stood slowly, looking at the surrounding rock formation with the concentrated gaze she had come to recognize as his working face. "But the temperature's consistent, which means it's not surface runoff. This is coming from depth. The geology in this range," he paused, ran a hand across the granite shelf. "There are thermal systems through here. Not widely documented. Not well known." He looked at her. "But they exist. Is it possible this goes through the whole eastern section?" "Possible." He chose the word with the precision of an engineer. "Worth finding out." She ordered the water testing kit that afternoon, driving down the mountain to get a cell signal strong enough to place the order. She waited with a patience that surprised her. The old Meredith, The one who had spent 3 decades in a profession that measured everything in quarterly increments, would have refreshed the tracking information hourly. This Meredith waited. She had learned something about waiting from the fire. The way it worked best when you stopped checking it constantly and simply trusted what you had built. The call came on a Tuesday morning. Meredith was splitting wood in the side yard. She had learned to do this over the preceding weeks, badly at first, then adequately, then with a competence that gave her a disproportionate amount of satisfaction when her phone buzzed in her coat pocket. Unknown number. She answered. The man on the other end introduced himself as Dr. Fenwick Lauer from the Northwest Geothermal and Environmental Sciences Institute. His voice was careful and professional and carried beneath it the particular controlled energy of a scientist trying not to sound more excited than he believed was appropriate. The mineral composition of her water sample, he told her, was exceptional. High magnesium, consistent thermal signature, trace elements consistent with deep geothermal origin. He had, in his 20 years of analyzing water samples from this region, seen perhaps 4 results comparable to this one. The therapeutic application potential, he said, choosing his words with academic caution, is significant. There is genuine research interest in sites like this. And from a commercial standpoint. Thank you, Dr. Lauer, Meredith said. She hung up. She sat down on the chopping block in the snow. She looked at the mountain around her, the trees, the sky, the thin thread of steam she could just make out rising from the eastern ridge on cold mornings if she knew where to look. She looked at it for a long time. Then she went inside and told Soren. He didn't celebrate. She would have been suspicious of him if he had. Celebration was for outcomes, and this was still only a beginning. What he did instead was sit down at the kitchen table, pull the notebook toward him, and start asking questions. What were the exact boundaries of the eastern parcel? What was the current access road capacity? What were the zoning classifications for this type of mountain property? What did she actually want to build? That last question stopped her. What did she want to build? She had been thinking in terms of what was possible, what the land would allow, what permits might be obtained, what a woman with a modest severance and no development experience could realistically attempt. She had not yet let herself answer the deeper question underneath all of that. What did she want? She thought about the nights she had spent at her kitchen table in Portland, working late on other people's numbers, measuring her worth in columns that tallied everything except the things that actually mattered. She thought about the women she had watched over 3 decades, capable, committed women who had given their best years to institutions that calculated their value and productivity metrics and disposed of them when the metrics shifted. She thought about the first guest she might ever welcome here, who she would be, what she would need. Something small, Meredith said finally. 3 cabins. Maybe 4. Private. No spa branding, no wellness marketing language. Just, she searched for the right word. Quiet. A place where someone who has been told they're finished can come and sit in warm water under open sky and remember that they're not. Soren looked at her across the table. That's not a business plan, he said. No, she agreed. It's better than one. It's a reason. He held her gaze for a moment. Then he pulled the notebook closer and began to draw. The months that followed were the hardest Meredith had worked in her life, and the most alive she had felt in longer than she could honestly remember. There were permit applications, environmental assessments, land use reviews, county zoning hearings where she stood in front of skeptical officials and presented her case without apology and without the reflexive shrinking she had practiced for 3 decades. There were contractors to negotiate with, material costs to calculate, a solar installation arranged at a discount through a local electrician named Drummond who heard her story at the town diner and decided she deserved a fair price. There were setbacks. The first zoning application was returned with 17 requested modifications. A delivery of cedar lumber arrived damaged and had to be returned and reordered, setting the construction timeline back 3 weeks. One morning in early April, Meredith slipped on a wet path and sprained her wrist badly enough to limit her work for 10 days, during which she sat at the kitchen table doing paperwork and tried not to let the frustration hollow her out. Soren worked through every setback with the same steady, problem-solving calm he had brought to the broken roof on that first night. He designed the cabin foundations to work with the natural gradient of the land rather than against it, saving significant excavation cost. He sourced reclaimed timber from a demolition site 40 miles away, driving down in a borrowed truck 3 times to collect it. He built the soaking tubs himself, deep cedar constructions that fit into the landscape as though they had always been there. The town, initially indifferent, began to shift. Charlotte, who ran the diner and had told Meredith on her first visit that the town needed life, became an unofficial advocate, mentioning Silver Pine Springs to every tourist who stopped in during spring. An older woman named Vesper, who had been quietly laid off from a regional hospital administration job 2 years earlier and had been living in a particular brand of invisible grief ever since, began stopping by twice a week. At first she came out of curiosity. Then she started bringing lunch. Then she asked if she could help. Meredith said yes immediately. The first cabin opened on a cool morning in early September. No ceremony, no ribbon, just a small hand-lettered sign at the base of the access road, Silver Pine Springs. By appointment. The first guest arrived that afternoon. Her name was Dorothea. She was 64. She had driven 3 hours from Missoula in a car with a cracked dashboard and a reusable bag in the back seat that contained, Meredith noticed, a library book and a thermos and a prescription bottle she moved to her jacket pocket when she got out. She looked like a woman who had not been anywhere just for herself in a very long time. Meredith showed her the path to the first cabin, showed her the temperature valve on the soaking tub, pointed out the view of the ridge from the cedar bench outside. Then she stepped back and let her be. For hours later, Dorothea emerged. Her face was different, not younger. By the following spring, there was a waiting list. Vesper had become the retreat's full-time coordinator, scheduling, correspondence, the particular art of making guests feel expected and welcomed without being managed. Soren had expanded the path network through the eastern property, installing small cedar benches at intervals that caught the morning light in ways that seemed, guests said repeatedly, almost deliberate. Letters arrived. Not reviews. Letters. Handwritten, some of them. From women who had come to Silver Pine Springs feeling invisible and left remembering they were not. From a man of 68 who had retired involuntarily and lost his sense of purpose and sat in the warm water for 2 hours on a November afternoon and felt, for the first time in a year, that his life still had a direction. Meredith kept every one of them in a wooden box on the kitchen table. On difficult days, and there were still difficult days, because building something real always has them, she would open the box and read one at random. Not for validation, for connection, for the reminder that what she had built was not a business, not a retreat, not a wellness destination. It was a place where people were told, quietly and without words, that they were not finished. One evening in late November, as the first anniversary of her arrival on the mountain approached, Meredith sat on the porch and watched snow begin to fall again. The same snow, the same mountain, the same cold pressing in from the ridge. But everything else was different. The cabins glowed with warm light across the property. Soren moved between them with a lantern, checking the pathways, tending the place with the same quiet devotion he had given it 3 winters ago when no one had asked him to. Vesper had already gone home for the evening, leaving a note on the kitchen table about tomorrow's arrivals. Meredith thought about the email that had arrived that morning. Her old firm. Another restructuring. Another round of eliminations. The language so familiar, she could have written it herself. She had waited for anger. It didn't come. She had waited for grief. It didn't come either. What came was something she had no previous word for, a complete and quiet sense of distance from a life that had once felt like the only possible version of herself. Like reading a chapter from a book she had finished and closed and placed on a shelf. She was not that chapter anymore. Soren came to stand beside her on the porch. First anniversary, he said. Yes. How does it feel? Meredith looked out at the snow falling across Silver Pine Springs. At the light in the cabins. At the mountain that had taken her in when she had arrived with nothing except a key that barely fit a lock. Like something that was always supposed to happen, she said. I just had to get fired first. Soren made a sound that was not quite a laugh, but contained everything a laugh contains. They stood in the snow for a long time. 2 people who had arrived here broken, by different roads and different losses, and had found in this specific piece of mountain ground something neither of them had been looking for. Not rescue. Not a second chance. Something quieter and more durable than either of those things. A place to be useful. A place to be necessary. A place to wake up in the morning and know, without requiring anyone else's confirmation, that your presence in the world was doing something that mattered. The snow fell. The lights stayed on. And Meredith Crane, who had arrived on this mountain to disappear, stood in the first snow of her second winter here and felt, in every part of herself, completely and irreversibly found. The ending isn't the end. It never is, with stories like this. In no time, we'll see where all of them are now, and you'll hear the moment that changed everything one final time, from a different angle entirely. Before I continue, I want to ask you something real. Is there something in your life right now that feels like an ending, but might actually be a beginning in disguise? You don't have to share the details. Just tell me, yes or no, in the comments. I think you might be surprised how many people answer the same way. 18 months after Meredith Crane drove up a snow-covered mountain road with everything she owned in the back of a sedan, a woman named Petra flew in from Edinburgh. She had seen photographs, of course. Her mother had sent them sporadically. The cabins mid-construction, the stream in spring, the view from the eastern ridge on a clear morning when the light came in at an angle that made everything look like something a painter had arranged deliberately. Petra had looked at those photographs on her phone in her Edinburgh kitchen while her toddler dismantled the lower cabinets, and had felt something she couldn't quite name. Pride partly, but also something that felt like relief. Like a worry she had carried for years, quiet, persistent, the specific worry of a daughter who knows her mother is capable of far more than her circumstances have allowed, had finally, quietly, been set down. She landed in Missoula on a Thursday afternoon and drove the 30 miles up the mountain in a rental car. And when she turned the last corner of the access road and Silver Pine Springs came into view, the 3-seater cabins glowing warm in the late afternoon light, the hand-lettered sign, the cleared paths winding through snow-dusted pines, she pulled over and sat for a moment. Then she got out and stood in the cold mountain air and looked at what her mother had built. Meredith was on the porch when Petra came up the path. They held each other for a long time without speaking. "Mom," Petra said finally, pulling back to look at her. At the gray hair unstyled and unashamed. At the weathered hands. At the steadiness behind her eyes that had not been there the last time they had stood this close. "You look old," Meredith said. "Alive," Petra said. "You look completely, entirely alive." Where they are now. Meredith Crane, 62, runs Silver Pine Springs year-round. The waiting list for the 3 soaking cabins runs 8 to 10 weeks. She has made a deliberate choice not to expand beyond what she and her small team can manage with genuine attention. No franchise, no investor conversations, no pivot toward the kind of scale that would require her to become the thing she left behind. She has started a monthly correspondence program for women over 50 navigating involuntary career transitions. It costs nothing to join. Participants receive a handwritten letter from Meredith every 4 weeks. Not advice, not a wellness curriculum, but simply the kind of honest, specific letter one capable woman writes to another when she wants her to know that the road continues. There are currently 214 women on the list. It is, she has said, the work she is most proud of. More than the cabins. More than the permits and the construction and the geothermal report that still sits framed on her kitchen wall. Because it costs her nothing except time and honesty. And it gives back more than she has ever found a way to calculate. Soren Hadley, 74, is the grounds and structural manager of Silver Pine Springs. He has a room in the cabin that is his, with his name on the door, a small wooden plaque he made himself from a piece of leftover cedar, and did not mention to Meredith until she found it one morning and stood looking at it for a long time, without saying anything. He has begun, quietly, to draw again. Not engineering schematics. Architectural sketches, small structures, imagined buildings, spaces designed around the idea of what people need when they are in the process of becoming something new. He has filled 2 notebooks. He has shown them to no one except Meredith, who looked through them one evening by the fire and said, "These are remarkable, Soren. Someone should see these." He is considering it. Vesper, who coordinated Silver Pine Springs through its first full year of operation, was offered a full partnership stake in the retreat by Meredith in the spring. She accepted with the particular composure of a woman who had not been offered anything significant in a long time and had learned to receive it without deflecting. She is currently developing a sister program, one-day workshops in the town, open to anyone, built around the radical idea that starting over is a skill that can be learned and practiced and shared. The first workshop had 11 participants. The third had 47. Charlotte, who runs the diner 30 miles down the mountain, has started keeping a copy of Meredith's correspondence program flyer beside the register. She hands it to women who come in alone and order coffee and sit for a while looking at nothing in particular. She has handed out, at last count, over 90 of them. And then there is Dorothea, the first guest. The woman with the library book and the thermos and the quiet exhaustion of someone who had not been anywhere just for herself in too long. She came back to Silver Pine Springs 4 months after her first visit. This time she brought her sister. The time after that, she brought a friend from her former workplace, a woman of 58 who had been passed over for a promotion she had earned and was moving through the aftermath with the specific, dignified silence of someone who has not yet found the words for what they are feeling. Dorothea brought her to the warm water and the cedar bench and the mountain view and the particular silence of a place that asks nothing of you except that you stay a while. The woman sat in that water for 3 hours. When she came out, she asked Dorothea how she had found this place. And Dorothea told her the story of a woman who was fired in the middle of winter and drove to a mountain she had never seen and found a stranger living in her house and chose, in the middle of a blizzard, to let him stay. And how that choice, that single unremarkable choice to extend grace to someone unexpected, had built something that was now changing lives one warm afternoon at a time. The woman listened to the whole story. Then she said, "I want to write her a letter." That letter is in the wooden box on Meredith's kitchen table, along with 213 others. On difficult days, she opens the box. She picks one at random. She reads it by the fire. And she remembers what she learned on the first night, the things Soren showed her about how to keep a fire burning through a long, cold night. You don't starve it. You don't let it run wild. You find the middle. You give it just enough air to keep breathing. And you trust that in the morning, when the darkness finally lifts and the mountain turns pale and quiet under new snow, it will still be there, burning steady, the way good things do when they have been built with honesty and tended with care and shared without reservation. The way you will still be there, whatever winter you are currently in, whatever roof is cracking overhead, whatever footprints you have found in the snow of your own unexpected beginning. You are not finished. You are not too late. You are exactly where the next chapter starts. Stories like this one exist because people like you choose to seek them out, and because kindness, when it is practiced honestly and without expectation of return, creates ripple effects that travel further than any of us can see from where we are standing. If this story reached something in you, if some part of Meredith's journey felt familiar, or Soren's quiet dignity resonated, or the idea of Silver Pine Springs felt like somewhere you needed to exist, then please, like this video. It is a small gesture that carries real weight. It tells the people who need this story that it is worth finding. Subscribe, and turn on the notification bell, so that the next story reaches you before the moment passes. These stories are researched and written with genuine care, because the world has enough noise and not enough warmth, and I believe you deserve both the story and the time it takes to tell it properly. And most importantly, look around your own life this week. Not for grand gestures, not for dramatic turning points, just for the small ones. The blanket handed across a cold room, the door held open, the honest word spoken to someone who needed to hear it, the decision to let an unexpected stranger stay. Those are the moments this story is actually about. Those are the moments that build things that last. Final question, and I mean this sincerely. What is one act of kindness you will commit to this week? It doesn't have to be large. It just has to be real. Write it in the comments below. Make it a promise you keep. And come back and tell me how it went. I will be here, reading every single one. Thank you for watching. Thank you for staying until the end. You are, without question, exactly the kind of person this story was made for.